The SCP Foundation has over 100 classifications that most people have never even heard of, from classes that literally mean we give up to ones so secret that knowing they exist might already be a problem. Today I'm breaking down every obscure SCP classification and what they actually mean. Thaumiel is where SCP classifications stop feeling like labels and start feeling like secrets. Most classes tell you how hard something is to contain. Thaumiel tells you that the Foundation has found something so useful, dangerous, and important that it becomes part of the containment system itself. In the simplest terms, a Thaumiel class SCP is an anomaly used to contain other anomalies. That already makes it one of the strangest classifications in the entire SCP universe. Safe means you can lock it up and relax a little. Euclid means it is unpredictable enough to keep everyone nervous. Keter means containment is a nightmare. But Thaumiel means the nightmare has been weaponized against another nightmare. It is not just something sitting in a box. It is the box, the lock, the key, the guard, or sometimes the emergency button no one wants to press. That is what makes Thaumiel feel so powerful as a concept. It takes the Foundation's usual role and twists it. Normally, the Foundation finds the impossible, studies it, hides it, and builds procedures around it. With Thaumiel, the Foundation is not just reacting to the anomalous world, it is actively using that world against itself. That sounds smart at first, but it also sounds incredibly risky, because when your containment plan depends on another anomaly, your safety net is already alive with problems. Thaumiel is basically the Foundation admitting that normal science, normal security, and normal reality are not enough. The class carries a very different kind of fear from Keter. Keter is scary because it is hard to keep contained. Thaumiel is scary because it implies there are worse things than the SCP itself. If the Foundation is willing to use one anomaly as a tool, then the threat it is aimed at must be terrifying. But if you think the Thaumiel class is something, this next classification is the one that's basically the Foundation admitting they overreacted explained. Here's the thing about the SCP Foundation. They contain eldritch horrors, reality-bending gods, and creatures that could end human civilization before lunch. But sometimes, they look at a file, squint real hard, and go, oh, that's just a weird hospital bed. That's the explained class, designated with an EX suffix. These are anomalies that turned out to be completely explainable through mainstream science. The Foundation studied them, probably threw a D class at them, and eventually realized there was nothing anomalous going on. Containment procedures, 0. The file gets stamped closed and everyone moves on. Documented examples include SCP-3000-EX, which turned out to be modified hospital beds, SCP-3393-EX, literally just called Girlfriend, and SCP-44445-EX, a Jurassic symbiotic quadruped, which is, not ideal naming if you're trying to sound like you had it under control. The explained class is basically the Foundation admitting their understanding of reality is provisional. The scariest organization on Earth sometimes just has to say, turns out, we didn't know enough science yet, but at least explained class SCPs get a happy ending. The next classification, not so much. Neutralized. Think of neutralized as the Foundation's obituary column. It's where anomalies go when they're dead, destroyed, deactivated, or otherwise permanently rendered inert. Unlike explained, these weren't misunderstandings. These were real, genuine anomalies that one day just stopped being anomalous. Here's the thing though, the Foundation almost never writes obituaries. Official policy strongly prefers containment over destruction. The Foundation would rather keep something alive in a box for eternity than risk what happens when you try to kill it. Neutralized designations are exceptional, reserved for scenarios where containment is flat out impossible, or the resource cost of keeping something locked up is so absurd that even the Foundation has to admit it's not worth it. And when you look at the numbers, it makes sense. Thousands of documented anomalies spanning decades of operation, and the neutralized list is shockingly small. Either these things are extraordinarily difficult to destroy, or the Foundation just really doesn't want to. But here's where it gets unsettling. Sometimes dead doesn't mean dead. SCP-3240 was originally classified as Keter. Nasty thing. The Foundation eventually destroyed it, filed the paperwork, stamped it neutralized, and moved on. Except it wasn't done. The destruction generated entirely new anomalous phenomena that nobody saw coming, forcing a reclassification to a designation called Hemal. They threw a funeral and the corpse sat up, which is, not ideal. But if a dead anomaly coming back to life sounds bad, wait until you hear about the ones that were never contained in the first place. Uncontained, the SCP Foundation has one job. It's literally in the name: secure, contain, protect. So what happens when they just can't? Uncontained is the classification that means the Foundation lost. The anomaly is out there, right now, wandering around doing whatever it wants, and nobody at any site on the planet knows where it is. It's the organizational equivalent of a surgeon going oops. Except the thing they dropped isn't a scalpel, it's a reality-bending nightmare with zero supervision. Here's the thing: an anomaly gets tagged Uncontained when it's still in the wild, has broken out of custody, or was spotted once and then vanished before anyone could grab it. And every second it stays free, the odds of some random civilian stumbling across it go up, which means the Veil Protocol, the entire global system keeping the public from learning that monsters are real, starts cracking. Some uncontained anomalies still carry secondary classifications like Keter based on what researchers think they can do, but that's all theoretical. Nobody's running tests, nobody's observing behavior patterns. The Foundation is just guessing based on whatever scraps of data they collected before the thing disappeared. The Keter label tells you how dangerous it probably is. The Uncontained label tells you something worse: that the most powerful secret organization on Earth tried to put it in a box and failed. That's not a threat level. That's an admission of defeat. But if Uncontained is the Foundation admitting it lost something, wait until you hear about the classification where they find something and deliberately choose to leave it alone. Archon, the SCP Foundation is built on one principle: if it's weird, put it in a box. Secure, contain, protect. It's literally in the name. So what happens when the Foundation finds something anomalous, builds the box, designs the containment procedures, and then just doesn't close the door? That's Archon.Archon class anomalies are entities the Foundation could theoretically contain, but has made the conscious decision not to. Not because they can't, because containing them would make things worse. The name comes from the ancient Greek word for ruler, which is fitting because these anomalies essentially govern some aspect of reality that humanity depends on. Pull them out and you damage the fabric of civilization itself. Here's where it gets philosophically interesting. The Foundation, an organization so obsessed with control that it will throw D-class personnel into meat grinders just to test a hypothesis, has looked at certain monsters and said, yeah, that one stays. They have the cage, they have the lock, they're choosing to leave both on the shelf. That's not a containment failure. That's a policy decision. These entities may form part of what's called consensus reality, the shared framework of existence that keeps human society functioning. Remove them, and you're not just losing one anomaly, you're potentially unraveling something foundational to how people experience the world. The real kicker? There's no backup plan. If an Archon-class entity decides to go rogue, there's no containment to fall back on. The Foundation is betting everything on these things behaving themselves, which is, you know, not ideal. But if Archon represents anomalies the Foundation chooses not to contain, the next class takes that concept even further, into territory where the word containment stops meaning anything at all. Ticonderoga. So the Foundation has a class for things it could contain, but chooses not to. That's Archon. Cool. But what about things the Foundation literally can't contain, even if it wanted to, but that also don't pose enough of a threat to warrant panic? That's Ticonderoga, and the poster child for this classification is, I kid you not, an alien entity living inside Al Gore. Let me explain. SCP-44444 is an incorporeal extra-dimensional entity that has been cohabitating with former US Vice President Al Gore since approximately 1998. The entity can alter Gore's dimensionality, allowing him to become incorporeal and phase through any containment attempt the Foundation throws at him. You can't lock up something that stops being physical whenever it feels like it. The Foundation didn't just fail to contain this one, they realized they fundamentally lacked the tools, knowledge, and resources to even begin. So they invented an entirely new classification just for the occasion. The name itself comes from the Mohawk word Tekontaro Ken, meaning the junction between two waterways. It's meant to reflect the liminal nature of these anomalies, sitting right at the boundary between what the Foundation knows and what it doesn't, which is, you know, not ideal for an organization whose entire job is knowing things. Here's where it gets unsettling. Ticonderoga class anomalies might be everywhere. The classification accounts for entities that could be widespread or even ubiquitous on Earth without anyone noticing, or that exist in extraterrestrial locations completely outside the Foundation's operational reach. If one of these things can hide inside a former vice president for over 2 decades without detection, how many others are just sitting inside ordinary people right now? But at least Ticonderoga anomalies don't need to be contained. The next class we're covering, those ones are already done causing problems. Permanently, Cernunos. This is where things stop being weird and start being genuinely horrifying. Not because of what the anomaly does, but because of what the Foundation won't do about it. Cernunos class anomalies are entities the Foundation can contain. They have the blueprints, they have the resources, they know exactly how to build the cage, but the cage requires something unacceptable to construct. We're talking containment procedures that would violate the Foundation's most basic ethical principles or cause catastrophic collateral damage to everyone. SCP-4971 is the reason this classification exists. It's the anomaly that broke the system so badly they had to invent a new label for it. Containment of SCP-4971 requires performing a specific ritualistic sequence. Sounds manageable, right? Here's the kicker. That sequence necessitates the death of most of the global population. Not some, not many, most. Containing this one anomaly would literally trigger a K-class scenario, which is the exact thing the Foundation exists to prevent. So they looked at the containment procedures, looked at the body count, and said no, which is, reassuring in a deeply unsettling way. And that's what makes Cernunos fascinating. It's the classification that proves the Foundation has a conscience. They acknowledge the solution exists, they just refuse to use it because the solution is genocide. But here's where the emotional range gets wild. SCP-5849 is also Cernunos class, and it's a postal worker with wings. It delivers letters from deceased individuals to the living, helping people find reconciliation and closure with loved ones they've lost. A ghost mailman helping people grieve. Same classification as the thing that requires billions of deaths to contain. That contrast alone tells you everything about how strange and morally complicated this system really is. But if you think ethical dilemmas are complicated, wait until you see what happens when 2 anomalies start containing each other. Hemal. Most Foundation classifications boil down to one simple question. Can you put it in a box? Hemal throws that entire philosophy out the window. Because Hemal class anomalies aren't single things you can isolate. They're interrelated sets of anomalies that keep each other in check, and containment means maintaining the balance between them, not separating them. Think of it like a game of Jenga, except every block is radioactive and the table is on fire. The word itself comes from a term meaning wintry, which is actually perfect. These classifications exist in a state of frozen, precarious stillness. Everything is fine as long as nobody breathes too hard. SCP-3240 is the best example of how this works, and its reclassification history reads like a comedy of errors. It started as Keter, dangerous, hard to contain, standard nightmare fuel. Then the Foundation apparently dealt with it, and it got bumped down to neutralized. Problem solved. Everybody go home. Turns out, no researchers discovered that what they thought was a single anomaly was actually part of a much larger system, and by containing the original threat using standard procedures, they disrupted the equilibrium holding everything together. New anomalous phenomena started generating as a direct result, so SCP-3240 went from Keter to neutralized to Hemal, which is the Foundation's way of admitting they made things worse by doing their job correctly. The containment logic here completely inverts Foundation orthodoxy. Normally, you want to minimize how many dangerous things are sitting in the same building. Hemal says the opposite. You need precise spatial relationships between multiple dangerous entities, because pulling one piece out collapses the whole structure, which is, not ideal for an organization whose entire business model is putting things in separate boxes. But if Hemal is about keeping broken pieces together, the next classification is about making absolutely sure they stay apart. Maxer. This is the one that makes the Foundation look less like scientists and more like butchers. Maxer class anomalies are entities that have been broken apart into separate pieces, where each fragment is itself anomalous, and every single piece must be kept permanently separated from the others. The containment isn't about locking something up, it's about making sure the pieces never find each other again. Here's the thing, the classification exists because reassociation is the nightmare scenario. If even one fragment reconnects with its counterparts, the reconstituted entity represents a compound threat that exceeds anything the individual components could do alone. So the Foundation's solution was elegant in the most horrifying way possible. They couldn't kill it, so they tore it apart and scattered the remains across the planet, and that's not an exaggeration. Maxer is arguably the most complex containment category the Foundation runs. Instead of one entity at one site, you're maintaining separation across multiple anomalous components potentially distributed across different facilities on different continents. One slip up at Site 19, one miscommunication with the team at Site 64, and the pieces start finding each other. Which is, you know, not ideal, but the part nobody wants to think about is the consciousness question. If the original entity was aware, are the fragments aware too? Imagine being deliberately shattered into pieces, each piece potentially conscious, each piece locked in a different room on a different side of the world, knowing the rest of you exists somewhere out there. The Foundation looked at something too dangerous to kill and said, fine, we'll just make it wish we had. And if you think scattering something across the globe sounds precarious, wait until you hear about the classification that can't decide what it even is. Pendulum. Here's a question the Foundation never wanted to ask. What do you do with something that won't stay classified? Most anomalies are one thing. They're safe, they're Euclid, they're Keter. You figure out how dangerous they are, you write the procedures, you file the paperwork, and you move on with your life. But some anomalies don't let you do that. Certain SCPs have been observed shifting between object classes over time, swinging from relatively harmless to catastrophically lethal in cycles that may or may not be predictable. 1 week it's sitting quietly in a box. The next week it's trying to rewrite local physics. Then it's back in the box again, like nothing happened. Think of it like a pendulum. It never stops moving. It swings from one extreme to the other, and even when you can predict the rhythm, it's never actually at rest in any single position. That's exactly what these anomalies do. They refuse to be one thing, and that breaks the Foundation's entire filing system. See, containment protocols are built around stable threat assessments. You evaluate the danger, you design the box, you assign the staff. But an anomaly that fluctuates between safe and Keter requires protocols for every possible state simultaneously. Your containment team needs procedures for the calm phase, the active phase, and the everyone evacuate the building phase, all written into the same document. The paperwork alone is a nightmare. Every time the anomaly shifts, the procedures shift with it. Adaptive containment, rolling threat levels, personnel who have to be trained for multiple scenarios at once. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of trying to write a weather forecast that's accurate forever. But if reclassified anomalies are hard to label, the next classification doesn't even pretend labels matter anymore. Apollyon. Every classification we've talked about so far has some angle, some workaround, some way the Foundation can look at the problem, roll up its sleeves, and at least pretend it has a handle on things. Apollyon is the one where they stop pretending, named after the biblical figure associated with the apocalypse because subtlety was apparently off the table. Apollyon class anomalies are entities that cannot be contained, are expected to breach containment imminently, or represent scenarios where every single assumption the Foundation operates on has completely fallen apart. This isn't a classification that says we need more resources, it's a classification that says we lose. Here's the thing, the Foundation doesn't slap this label on something lightly. Apollyon means the O5 Council, the 13 most powerful people in the organization, have looked at the data, run the projections, and concluded that the world as we know it is going to end. Containment isn't the goal anymore, damage mitigation is, and even that might not work. The most famous example is SCP-001, when day breaks. The sun itself becomes hostile, not a monster, not a portal. The sun, every organism exposed to visible light, gets liquefied and converted into an amorphous flesh entity. Approximately 6.8 billion casualties within the first 24 hours. That's not a containment breach. That's the end of everything, delivered by the one thing on Earth nobody can hide from. And that's what makes Apollyon so uniquely horrifying. It's not a monster in a box. It's the Foundation writing its own death certificate in advance. Imagine being on the O5 Council. You know the apocalypse is coming. You have the projections. You have the timeline. And you can't stop it. You can only sit there and watch the clock tick down, knowing that every protocol you've ever written, every anomaly you've ever contained, every sacrifice your people have ever made amounts to nothing, which is, you know, not ideal. But if Apollyon is the Foundation admitting defeat, the next classification is the Foundation admitting it doesn't even understand the game. Azathoth. Here's where things stop making sense entirely. Azathoth class is named after Lovecraft's blind idiot god, a cosmic entity so incomprehensibly vast that all of reality is just its dream, and the classification lives up to the name. Azathoth class entities allegedly possess power that infinitely exceeds every other anomaly in the system. Not threatens a city power, not threatens humanity power, threatens the fundamental structure of reality itself. But here's the thing, Azathoth class might not even be real. It appears in some Foundation documentation while being completely absent from official reference materials. Its very existence is ambiguous. You can't confirm it, you can't deny it, and somehow that's worse than either option. SCP-4626 was briefly designated Azathoth before being reclassified as safe. Harmless, right? Except personnel who spent extended time near it developed irrational beliefs about its destructive capacity. They became obsessed with containing it, not because the object was dangerous, but because the label was. Proximity to the concept of Azathoth class generated anomalous psychological effects. The classification itself was the hazard. Let that sink in for a second. A filing category drove people insane. Then there's SCP-579, which the community frequently points to as the archetypal Azathoth entity. It's allegedly imprisoned at the center of the universe, maintained in eternal slumber by an ensemble of musicians playing without end, which, if that sounds familiar, is exactly how Lovecraft described Azathoth itself. Cosmic flute players keeping a god asleep so reality doesn't blink out of existence. Cool, that's also a thing that happens, so here's what you're left with. The Foundation apparently has a classification tier that officially doesn't exist, for entities that can unmake reality, and just knowing about it might make you anomalous. And if they're hiding that, you have to wonder what else exists in their system that we're not even allowed to conceptualize. Some questions don't have answers. Some answers are the problem. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.